Okay, let's unpack this a bit. We often hear about the enormous challenges facing our education systems today. The headlines could be pretty stark, right? Screaming about everything from learning loss and persistent achievement gaps to teacher shortages and critical budget shortfalls. It can genuinely feel like the entire structure is on incredibly shaky ground, maybe even, as some might say, falling apart. But what if those challenges, those very cracks we perceive in the old foundation, are actually maybe paving the way for something fundamentally new, something more resilient, perhaps more responsive, and dare I say, deeply human-centered? What if the struggles we're observing aren't just signs of collapse, but rather the challenging yet vital birth pangs of well, a reimagined educational future?
That's a really interesting way to frame it. And what's truly fascinating here is how the sources we're diving into today. These are powerful excerpts from the book Street Data, a next generation model for equity, pedagogy, and school transformation. They propose a really radical reimagining of what data even means in an educational context. It's not just about finding a new way to collect information or tweaking an existing system. It's more profound than that. It's about a profound, almost spiritual shift in perspective, really. This approach moves us decisively away from purely quantitative metrics and towards something far more qualitative, nuanced, and crucially equitable. It challenges us to look beyond the numbers that have, long dominated our discourse and to truly see the vibrant, complex, and unique individuals that make up our student population.
That's a powerful distinction, a really powerful one. And our mission in this deep dive, then, is to explore exactly how this street data approach aims to move beyond simply, counting, measuring, and classifying students and their learning. Instead, it pushes us towards a model of truly listening, understanding, and loving them. We're going to try and uncover how this deeply humanistic approach could create a far more just and thriving educational landscape, a space where every young person can genuinely learn, develop their full potential, and maybe most importantly, thrive on their own terms. It sounds like it's about building a system that nurtures growth and self-discovery, rather than just measuring performance against, predefined benchmarks.
Absolutely. And these sources provide a truly rich tapestry of perspectives. They offer both insightful academic rigor and deeply personal narratives. We'll be hearing from leading voices in educational equity and research. Figures like Zan Mehta, who's a distinguished professor of education at Harvard, also LaShawn Chapman, the executive director of the National Equity Project, and Sean Ginwright from San Francisco State University. But we'll also delve into the deeply personal journey of one of the book's authors, Lisa K. Solomon. Her story provides these concrete, lived examples of what this vision actually looks like in practice. And it illustrates the stark contrast between traditional, often restrictive approaches to education and this new paradigm. It's a compelling blend of theory brought vividly to life through, real-world application.
Okay, so let's get into the core of it. When we typically hear the word data in education, our minds almost automatically jump to those familiar metrics, right? Standardized test scores, attendance rates, graduation statistics, maybe even disciplinary records. These are the traditional benchmarks we've used for decades to gauge success or identify failure. But street data proposes something entirely different, something that profoundly challenges this ingrained notion. So to truly kick us off, what is this concept asking us to foreground instead of those familiar numbers? What's the core definitional shift they're advocating for? How do we even begin to unlearn our current understanding of data?
Well, like you said, it's a fundamental paradigm shift. Jal Mehta, the Harvard professor I mentioned, points this out really clearly. He emphasizes that street data foregrounds listening, understanding, and loving over counting, measuring, and classifying. Now, this isn't just a minor adjustment or, a change in terminology. It's a complete reorientation of how we perceive, gather, and ultimately use information about student learning and well-being. Think of it this way. Instead of simply tallying up what a student doesn't know on a standardized test, we're asked to lean in and truly listen to their stories, to understand the context of their lives, and to approach their development with genuine love and care. And LaShawn Chapman from the National Equity Project really drives this home. She asserts that street data issues an urgent, timely provocation to listen to, honor, and be informed by the experiences, wisdom, fears, and aspirations of children and families who have been forced to the margins.
Forced to the margins.
Exactly. This is so critical because it means actively moving beyond what we call deficit-based thinking.
Okay, deficit-based thinking.
Right. That's the mindset where we primarily look for what's wrong or missing in a student or a community. Instead, street data insists we genuinely seek out and value the rich lived experiences, the inherent wisdom, and the profound strengths of those who have historically been overlooked, underserved, or even actively harmed by the existing system. It's about recognizing that knowledge and capability exist in many forms, far beyond what traditional metrics can capture. Chapman also explains that it's about freeing ourselves from old constructs about data for improvement that are rooted in whiteness as normative.
Okay, that phrase, rooted in whiteness as normative, that sounds really important. Can you unpack that a bit more?
Sure, it's a crucial point, and it really impacts the foundation of educational equity. When data constructs are rooted in whiteness as normative, it basically implies that the standard measurements we use, the assessments, the curriculum content, even the kinds of questions we ask, are built on a set of cultural assumptions, values, and experiences that are predominantly Western, or more specifically, white middle class.
Ah, okay, so the baseline itself might be biased.
Precisely. Think about a standardized test question that assumes a certain type of cultural background knowledge that not all kids have. Or maybe a classroom discussion format that privileges, say, individual verbal performance over collaborative problem solving, which might be more valued in other cultures.
Right. I can see how that would create issues.
Exactly. Such inherent biases can lead to a fundamental misunderstanding or misrepresentation of the realities, the knowledge systems, and the strengths of students from diverse backgrounds. These traditional data points often fail to capture the full picture of students' intelligence, their community contributions, their resilience, simply because those attributes don't fit neatly into the predefined, often culturally biased assessment boxes.
So the measurements themselves can perpetuate inequality.
That's the core argument, yes. Unless we critically challenge these biases, our current measurements can continue to fail the very students they claim to serve. So what's the alternative they propose? Instead, the book calls for integrating concepts like wholeness, justice, deep culture, personal mastery, and agency into our school transformation efforts.
Wholeness, justice, deep culture, mastery, agency. Okay, that's a lot. What does that look like in practice?
Right. So wholeness means recognizing a student as more than just a test score. They're emotional, social, cultural, intellectual beings, all connected. It means considering their mental health, their family life, their passions, not just academic output.
Okay, seeing the whole person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then justice implies actively working to dismantle those systemic inequities and barriers within the system itself. It's proactive change, not just reactive.
Makes sense.
Deep culture means valuing and intentionally incorporating the rich cultural backgrounds, languages, community knowledge students bring, seeing these as assets.
Assets, not deficits.
No.
Got it.
Right. And finally, personal mastery and agency emphasize empowering students to own their learning journey, develop their unique talents, become active participants. Moving away from that passive recipient model, this whole approach is designed to reveal the inherent brilliance and potential in every young person, rather than just identifying perceived gaps or focusing only on remediation.
This is such a profound shift in mindset, isn't it? Moving from that deficit model to one rooted in assets and strengths. It really raises an important question, though. Why is it so incredibly crucial to challenge these traditional data constructs right now, in this very moment? And what does that phrase, rooted in whiteness as normative, truly imply for the very fabric of educational equity on a day-to-day level in our classrooms? It sounds like it goes far beyond just a statistical problem. It touches on fundamental issues of fairness, opportunity, and, well, human dignity.
You're absolutely right. It's about much more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. The urgency comes from the fact that traditional data, with its often narrow and culturally biased lenses, consistently fails to capture the full spectrum of student experience, especially for those historically marginalized.
Can you give an example?
Sure, think about a typical scenario. A standardized test might tell you a student's reading level, okay? But it absolutely won't tell you about the complex family dynamics they navigate daily, or their deep understanding of community issues they've picked up from real-life experiences, or their incredible creativity in solving problems outside of a sterile test format. These are critical aspects of who a student is, but they often remain invisible to the conventional system.
Invisible, yeah.
So, street data. By focusing on rich, qualitative insights, the stories you collect through intentional conversations, observations of students and their environments, deep dives into their projects and passions, it aims to reveal these systemic barriers and individual strengths that are consistently overlooked by standardized metrics. It seeks to uncover the richness, the nuance, the lived realities often hidden when we only rely on quantitative measures. It's really about building a more complete, authentic picture of each learner. And this humanistic approach is fundamentally about embedding love, equity, curiosity, and courage into every facet of our efforts to manifest learning spaces where every young person learns, develops, and thrives.
Love, equity, curiosity, courage. Those aren't words you typically associate with data analysis.
Exactly. But here, they're pedagogical imperatives, an ethical stance, really. When we approach education with love, we prioritize the holistic well-being and growth of the whole child, understanding that emotional security is key for deep learning. When we prioritize equity, we actively work to dismantle the systemic disadvantages, the unseen hurdles. Recognizing fairness isn't just equal treatment, but providing what each student uniquely needs. Curiosity drives us to understand each student's unique journey, their passions, their questions, rather than forcing them into a rigid, one-size-fits-all mold. And courage. Well, courage is required to challenge the entrenched systems, the comfortable routines that have historically perpetuated inequities and resisted change. Dr. Bettina Love, in her powerful endorsement for the book, captures this beautifully. She states that street data gives us a vibrant picture of what it means to do school when we authentically center our students.
Authentically center our students.
Yes. And she emphasizes that this approach is about creating a more just education system by focusing on the humanizing work of liberation, Black imagination, and freedom dreaming.
Wow. Liberation, imagination, freedom dreaming. That takes it to another level.
It does.
Yeah.
This isn't just about academic achievement in the traditional sense. It's about empowering students, especially those from historically marginalized communities, to envision and create a future that is truly equitable and free for themselves and their communities. It's about tapping into their intrinsic capacity for innovation, self-determination, collective action, rather than simply preparing them to fit into existing structures. It's an incredibly powerful and transformative vision for what education can be, moving from mere instruction to genuine emancipation.
This really does sound like a blueprint for a profound cultural shift in education. And it makes me think about the broader context the author highlights, placing this whole call for transformation within a very specific and frankly tumultuous period, 2021. They describe it as a time when the world order is reorganizing itself, and along with it, our education systems are as well. That's a profound statement. It implies a moment of global upheaval directly impacting our schools. What does this mean for the current state of education, this palpable sense of flux? And why does it make this deep dive into human data, into street data, so urgently needed right now? What are the implications of such a global reordering on something as fundamental as how we teach our children?
It's a fascinating point. It points to two very distinct, almost contradictory perspective or policy wavelengths on what's happening within education during this period of global reordering. On one hand, if you tune into what the author calls policy wavelength, the dominant narrative is often that the system is falling apart without its usual architecture.
Right, the falling apart narrative we hear a lot.
Exactly. This view suggests that the established structures, the rigid routines, the standardized metrics, the top-down accountability frameworks, they're unraveling. It describes a sense of loss, a fear that without the traditional guardrails, things are collapsing into chaos or decline. This perspective often focuses on deficiencies, on what's lost, and on the struggle to maintain control. You hear terms like learning loss, achievement gaps widening, a general sense of crisis. However, the source offers a really powerful counter-perspective by tuning into educators on the ground.
The view from the front lines.
Yes. And from their vantage point, a very different story emerges. The system is self-correcting and humanizing itself in a yearning for reinvention.
Self-correcting and humanizing. That's optimistic.
It is. It's a profoundly optimistic and empowering view. It suggests that while the old ways might be crumbling, it's not a collapse into nothingness. It's more like an organic bottom-up evolution, a natural adaptation driven by the immediate needs and innovative spirit of those closest to the students. It speaks volumes about the resilience of educators. The source gives concrete examples of this self-correction in action, things that directly manifest this yearning for reinvention. They paint a vivid picture. For instance, it mentions relevant, just-in-time professional learning.
Okay, so training that actually meets immediate needs.
Right, not generic workshops designed years ago. It indicates educators actively seeking out and receiving training that addresses their immediate challenges, tailored to the rapidly changing landscape, responsive learning for professionals. Then there's the incredibly simple yet profoundly powerful act of teachers calling their students one by one to ask, "How are you? What do you need?"
That's street data right there, isn't it?
Absolutely. Human-centered data collection in its purest form. directly engaging with students, not just about academics, but about their emotional well-being, their access to resources, their personal struggles, their triumphs. It acknowledges the student as a whole person, and it points to pedagogical thought leaders who are pushing us to move beyond the packet and engage students in deep learning.
Beyond the packet. We all know what that means. Worksheets. Wow.
Exactly. The packet is a potent symbol of rote, superficial learning, often just worksheets handed out, designed for compliance rather than real comprehension. Deep learning, by contrast, signifies meaningful, engaging, relevant educational experiences, fostering critical thinking, creativity, real-world problem-solving, substance over surface. All of these examples, when you put them together, beautifully illustrate that this manifests the creativity, care, and connection that exist and persist inside the system.
Even amidst the chaos.
Yes. Despite the perception of things falling apart, despite the immense challenges of that 2021 backdrop, there's an enduring spirit of innovation and dedication among educators and communities. And, crucially, this period of reorganization is fostering new webs of interdependence like never before.
New webs of interdependence.
Yeah.
Like people connecting more.
Precisely. People, teachers, parents, community organizers, students themselves are connecting, collaborating, supporting each other in ways that maybe weren't as prevalent when the old, rigid architecture was firmly in place. This increased interdependence is a vital sign of a system adapting, building new foundations based on human connection, shared purpose, and a collective understanding of what truly matters. It's an organic, bottom-up response to an unprecedented moment, highlighting that even in perceived chaos, there's immense potential for positive, humanizing growth. It's really a story of resilience.
So what does all this mean for the practical application of these ideas then? If our education systems are, as the source suggests, in such a profound state of reorganization, kind of teetering between falling apart and actively self-correcting, how does street data specifically offer key insights about how to transform data and explore indigenous knowledge creation for a new world, as Sean Ginwright puts it? It sounds like it's providing a crucial, maybe even foundational, framework for navigating this turbulent yet potentially transformative period.
Exactly. Street data is presented as a direct, actionable response to this systemic reordering, a way to channel that yearning for reinvention into concrete practice. It offers new ways to analyze, diagnose, and assess everything from student learning to district improvement to policy.
Okay, so it's comprehensive, not just about the classroom.
Right. This is significant because it implies a complete overhaul of how we understand educational health and progress, moving far beyond those traditional limited metrics. Instead of just looking at test scores to diagnose a problem in a school or district, street data invites us to consider the underlying social, emotional, cultural factors influencing learning and development. It provides tools for understanding the rich, complex context in which students live and learn. This allows educators and policymakers to make far more informed, empathetic, and ultimately more effective decisions at every level: classroom, district office, policymaking. What's also critically important, and this connects profoundly to Ginwright's point about exploring indigenous knowledge creation for a new world, is that this transformation is not, and really cannot be, a solitary effort.
Right, it can't just be a few heroic teachers.
Exactly. Sophie Finelli, the president of the Stewart Foundation, articulates this powerfully. She states that the vision of educational justice laid out in the book will not be more widely practiced if we simply rely on individual teachers and principals to push forward alone into the headwinds.
Pushing alone into the headwinds.
Yeah.
That's a strong image.
It is. And she continues, it must be supported at systems and state levels so that it becomes the rule and not the exception. This highlights a fundamental truth. While individual acts of courage and innovation by teachers and principals are absolutely vital and inspiring, sustained, widespread change, the kind that truly transforms an entire system, requires systemic buy-in and structural support.
So policies need to change, funding needs to change.
All of it. It's simply not enough for a handful of dedicated educators to implement street data in their individual classrooms or schools. For it to truly transform education at scale, to become the dominant paradigm, it needs to be embraced by district policies, state regulations, funding priorities, even national educational dialogues. Without this broader, multi-layered support, these innovative, human-centered practices risk remaining isolated pockets of excellence. Beautiful exceptions, maybe, but not the standard that serves all students equitably. It's about shifting the entire ecosystem to value and integrate these richer, more authentic forms of data, much like valuing diverse knowledge systems.
The theoretical frameworks and the broader context we've discussed are incredibly compelling. They offer a powerful vision for the future. But sometimes, it takes a personal story to truly ground these abstract ideas in real-world experience, to show the friction and the triumph. The author's journey, starting way back in fall 1997, offers a really powerful illustration of this struggle. The struggle between a human-centered, expansive vision for teaching and the crushing pressures. What did your initial vision for teaching and learning look like back in those optimistic early days? How did they imagine a classroom and education itself?
Well, the author describes entering the classroom with a vision of teaching and learning that literally burst at the seams of the physical classroom space.
Burst at the seams. I like that.
Yeah. This wasn't a teacher who felt confined by four walls or a bell schedule or a rigid curriculum. Their pedagogy was inherently outward-looking, emphasizing real-world engagement, hands-on activities, experiential learning. They understood that authentic learning flourishes beyond traditional boundaries. They made it a point to take students outside of the classroom as often as they possibly could, recognizing that valuable learning happens everywhere in communities, in nature, through direct observation and interaction, not just in a traditional academic setting.
That immediately sounds like the street data philosophy in action.
Absolutely. Valuing lived experience, understanding context beyond standardized settings, recognizing the richness of non-traditional knowledge. It fits perfectly. And the source provides several incredibly compelling examples of this expansive, experiential approach. They illustrate the depth of engagement and impact. For instance, their U.S. history students didn't just read about immigration from a textbook. No, they went on a powerful field trip visiting Angel Island to study the harrowing and often overlooked history of Chinese immigration to California.
Wow, actually going there.
Exactly. Direct engagement with a historical site. It offered a palpable, emotional, deeply personal connection to the past, made the learning tangible, unforgettable. Then there were the American democracy students. They didn't just passively listen to lectures, they conducted a mock Congress.
A mock Congress, okay.
And this wasn't some dry exercise in parliamentary procedure. They wrote and debated bills on pressing social issues relevant to their lives and communities. And there's this truly unforgettable moment recounted in the source. A student named Jorge wrote an LGBTQ rights bill. During the intense debate, with a visibly trembling voice apparently, he gathered the courage to come out as gay to the class when his legislation was mocked by some peers.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's incredibly powerful.
Isn't it? This anecdote just powerfully illustrates how authentic, student-driven learning experiences can transcend mere academics. They can create profound moments of personal growth, vulnerability, community building, fostering empathy and understanding in a way no test could ever measure. It's a testament to the power of a classroom designed for deep human connection and active citizenship. And this innovative approach didn't stop there either. The author's pre-law students developed this ambitious project investigating equity in education.
Pre-law students investigating equity. Interesting.
Yeah, and it wasn't hypothetical. They actively visited 5 radically different Bay Area public schools, from affluent suburban campuses to under-resourced urban schools. They went to report on the glaring access and opportunity gaps they witnessed firsthand.
So they were doing real investigative journalism, essentially.
Pretty much. This immersive investigative approach taught them critical thinking, rigorous research skills, and a deep, visceral understanding of systemic inequities, in a way that simply reading a textbook or listening to a lecture never could. The impact of this student-led project was so significant that the following year, it evolved into a formal partnership with a nearby private school, bridging communities, fostering dialogue. And furthermore, this groundbreaking work even became the subject of an Emmy-nominated PBS documentary called Making the Grade back in 1999.
Wow, Emmy-nominated. That's amazing.
It is. These examples aren't just compelling stories. They are concrete, powerful demonstrations of deep learning, genuine student agency, powerful real-world connection. They align perfectly with the street data philosophy, valuing rich, qualitative insights into what truly fosters learning and development, ultimately aiming to cultivate active, empathetic citizens and critical thinkers, not just students who can ace a standardized test.
Okay, let's unpack this next part. This sounds like an incredibly vibrant, visionary, and truly human-centered approach to education, one that was clearly flourishing. But then, just a few years into this inspiring teaching career, that massive federal policy shift occurred. No Child Left Behind, NCLB, became law in 2002. How did this sweeping policy shift, with its intense focus on accountability and testing, impact that sense of possibility? How did it affect the kind of innovative, deeply engaging teaching the author was championing? It sounds like a direct, unavoidable head-on collision between two fundamentally different philosophies of education.
It was indeed a head-on collision, and the source describes it as directly leading to an eroding sense of possibility for educators like the author.
Eroding sense of possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right.
NCLB fundamentally shifted the focus in education towards narrow student outcomes, primarily measured by high-stakes tests. This meant that the rich, expansive, deeply human learning experiences the author championed, the field trips, mock congresses, community investigations, suddenly seemed less important, even superfluous, maybe, when the overriding imperative became ensuring students performed well on standardized assessments. The emphasis moved sharply away from cultivating critical thinking, fostering social-emotional development, encouraging creativity, promoting real-world application, and narrowed relentlessly to a specific, quantifiable set of academic competencies that could be easily measured and compared across schools and districts. This policy also brought significant changes in how teaching itself was structured, perceived, even controlled. Schools and districts were heavily encouraged, sometimes implicitly, sometimes explicitly, to adopt pacing guides to ensure teachers stay on track.
Pacing guides.
Yeah.
Keeping everyone on the same page, same day.
Exactly. A top-down standardization of the curriculum and a prescribed speed for delivery, regardless of student needs, learning styles, or local context. It stripped away teacher autonomy. And even more restrictively, the underlying philosophy that emerged, as the source points out, became kind of, if you can't trust your teachers, script the curriculum.
Wow. Script the curriculum. That implies a real lack of trust.
A profound lack of faith in the professional judgment, expertise, and creativity of educators. Instead of empowering teachers to respond dynamically and thoughtfully to their students' unique needs, NCLB pushed towards a rigid, one-size-fits-all approach. This directly counteracted the humanizing, responsive teaching the author had envisioned and practiced. It effectively took the focus off the individual learner and their holistic development and placed it squarely on meeting mandated targets, often at the expense of genuine understanding, critical inquiry, and the joy of discovery. The organic flow of learning, the cultivation of curiosity, largely replaced by a rigid, compliance-driven framework.
That's a stark contrast indeed. A really stark contrast. So what does this all mean for the practitioners on the ground who still held on to that original vision? By 2003, the author became a principal at June Jordan School for Equity, or JJSE. This school, instead of bending to these new restrictive policy winds, actually leaned further into that human-centered, expansive vision. How did JJSE manage to become a countercultural symbol, and even, as the source says, a pariah in the district, by holding onto its vision of equity and deep learning amidst such intense pressure to conform to the NCLB mandates?
Well, JJSE became a countercultural symbol precisely because it courageously refused to abandon its deep commitment to humanistic, inquiry-based learning despite the overwhelming policy tide. While other districts were actively competing for the best pacing guides, packaged curricula, and turnaround strategies, all clear symptoms of that NCLB era's focus on standardization and quick fixes.
Right, the buzzwords of the time.
Exactly. JJSE was doing something fundamentally different. They were actively developing discussion-based seminar courses and project exhibitions. This meant students were engaged in rich, collaborative intellectual work, deeply debating complex ideas, presenting original research, demonstrating mastery through authentic, multifaceted projects, rather than just filling in bubbles on a test. This approach fundamentally celebrated critical thinking, articulate communication, real-world application over rote memorization. Furthermore, JJSE was proactively shaping a performance-based assessment system, directly challenging that narrow focus on high-stakes standardized tests.
Performance-based assessment, so showing what you can do with knowledge.
Precisely. Evaluating how students can apply it, synthesize it, create with it, rather than just recall isolated facts. This was in stark contrast to what was happening elsewhere. Principals across the district were busy monitoring teachers for compliance with the Blackboard Configuration, or BBC.
The BDC, what was that?
It was described as a teacher-proof lesson structure meant to be an equity panacea.
Teacher-proof. Wow, that term itself is problematic.
Profoundly telling and deeply problematic, yes. It indicates that profound distrust in teacher expertise and skill. The idea was that a rigidly scripted curriculum was the only reliable way to ensure consistency and, supposedly, equity by removing the variable of the teacher.
So it flattened teaching into something mechanical.
Essentially, yes. It stripped teachers of their autonomy, creativity, ability to respond authentically to their students. And the profound human impact of this shift away from student-centered education is powerfully captured by Mrs. Alondra Jones. She was one of the author's very first students who went on to achieve her BA and MSW at Howard University quite accomplished. In the source, she deeply lamented the loss of the human element of education as NCLB swept through schools.
Hearing that from a student,
Yeah.
that really hits home.
It does. It underscores that beyond abstract policy debates and impersonal statistics, real people students felt that tangible shift away from a personalized, caring, vibrant learning environment to one that became more mechanistic, impersonal, driven by external metrics. JJC's insistence on maintaining that human element, on valuing deep learning, authentic student expression, fostering community, it made them an outlier, even a pariah in the eyes of some who prioritize compliance above all else. Yet, ironically, it also became a powerful, inspiring model of genuine equity and deep learning. So much so that educational luminary Linda Darling-Hammond later profiled it as an exemplary school.
Wow.
It just demonstrates the enduring power of a vision rooted in human connection and intellectual vitality, even when it directly opposes the prevailing institutional forces.
It's truly inspiring how, despite nearly 25 years of what the author unflinchingly calls a rigged system, a system often designed, it seems, to perpetuate inequities, they and others steadfastly held on to an image of what is possible. What was this unwavering vision, this core conviction that allowed them to resist the prevailing tide of standardization and that deficit-based thinking? And how did it fundamentally counter that harmful deficit narrative that had become so prevalent in educational discourse?
Well, the core conviction they held on to was a profound, unshakable rejection of a system that, as the author puts it, was designed to trap children in poverty and Black and brown children in a deficit narrative.
That deficit narrative, again, can you explain that a bit more?
Sure, it's a pervasive and, frankly, insidious mindset that really plagues education. It frames students, particularly those from marginalized communities, as inherently lacking knowledge, lacking motivation, lacking cultural capital, maybe coming from broken homes.
Right, focusing on what's missing.
Exactly. And this narrative, insidious in its simplicity, shifts the blame for systemic failures onto the individual child and their family, rather than critically examining the inherent flaws, biases, or structural inequities within the educational system itself. It focuses on what's wrong with the student, not the system serving them. So instead of succumbing to this damaging narrative, the author and their peers retain this vibrant vision of building classrooms, schools, and entire systems around students' brilliance, cultural wealth, and intellectual potential.
Brilliance, cultural wealth, intellectual potential. That's the opposite of deficit thinking.
Completely. It's a radical and necessary shift from the common "what's wrong with them" mindset to a profound inquiry into what are their inherent strengths, their gifts, their untapped capabilities. Brilliance here isn't just about traditional academic aptitude. It encompasses a vast spectrum of human intelligence, creativity, problem-solving, emotional intelligence, artistic expression, community-based knowledge. Cultural wealth acknowledges and enthusiastically celebrates the rich histories, traditions, languages, perspectives, community knowledge that students from diverse backgrounds bring.
Seeing those as assets.
Huge assets, foundations upon which to build rather than obstacles or something to be ignored or suppressed. This approach directly contrasts with what the author calls self-serving savior narratives that have us fixing and filling academic gaps.
Savior narratives, okay.
Yeah, those narratives often position educators as heroes swooping in to rescue students, which, however well-intentioned, can inadvertently perpetuate the deficit mindset and disempower students and families. It makes them objects of intervention rather than active agents in their own learning.
I see.
The alternative vision emphasizes genuine partnership, authentic empowerment, and a deep recognition of the vast potential already present, shifting the focus from remediation to cultivation, from fixing to flourishing.
This incredible journey, spanning decades of dedication, resistance, innovative practice, it clearly led to some indelible lessons. Lessons the author hopes will bloom in the book. Lessons that could fundamentally transform education as we know it. What are these profound insights that ultimately challenge our very definition of learning and success? And how do they point toward a more expansive, inclusive future for education?
The author really distills their extensive, hard-won experience into two core, profoundly transformative lessons. The first is that there are many ways of knowing and succeeding beyond those that dominate American and much of Western education.
Many ways of knowing and succeeding.
Yes. This is a direct, powerful challenge to the narrow, often rigid focus of standardized tests and traditional academic metrics. which tend to privilege a very specific type of intelligence, written, analytical, abstract reasoning, and a particular way of demonstrating knowledge, usually individual quiet work.
Hmm.
This lesson invites us, really urges us, to recognize and deeply value other forms of intelligence: emotional intelligence, creative intelligence, practical wisdom from experience, community knowledge, artistic expression, entrepreneurial spirit. It suggests success isn't just high scores. It's about navigating a complex world, contributing to community, innovating solutions, finding fulfillment using unique talents and diverse ways of understanding. It opens the door to recognizing brilliance that might not show up on a multiple choice test, but is profoundly evident elsewhere. The second profound lesson, equally radical, is that learning does not require a school building or even a classroom.
Wow, learning doesn't require school building. That's huge.
It is. It's a truly expansive concept that pushes us beyond the traditional brick-and-mortar model that has dominated for centuries. It implies valuable, legitimate learning happens everywhere, in homes, family traditions, community organizations, workplaces, apprenticeships, nature, cultural practices,
Yeah.
far beyond formal institutions.
So it frees us from thinking school's the only place learning happens.
Exactly. It frees us from that often unspoken assumption. It opens vast doors for innovative, community-based learning models, intergenerational learning, educational pathways embedded in real-world contexts, making learning immediately relevant and impactful. And this lesson connects directly back to Sean Ginwright's point about street data, offering insights to explore indigenous knowledge creation for a new world.
Right.
Yeah.
Because many indigenous knowledge systems aren't classroom-based.
Precisely. They often emphasize experiential learning, connection to land, oral storytelling, collective wisdom, things inherently not confined to a classroom. By acknowledging that learning isn't bound by walls or even a fixed curriculum, we can embrace these diverse forms of wisdom and create truly authentic, relevant, powerful educational experiences tailored to the unique lives, strengths, and needs of all learners, preparing them not just for a test, but for the multifaceted, dynamic realities of life itself. #outro.
Wow. This deep dive into street data reveals such a powerful, truly transformative argument for a fundamental shift in how we approach education. It's far more than just a new way to collect statistics, isn't it? It's a profound call to move beyond merely counting and measuring, beyond the narrow metrics and rigid structures that have often limited our view of student potential and, frankly, their humanity. Instead, it urges us to embrace a truly human-centered paradigm, to truly listen, to deeply understand, and to lovingly support, tapping into the inherent brilliance and vast cultural wealth of every single student. It's really about seeing the whole person, not just a series of disconnected data points.
Absolutely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it means recognizing that knowledge is most valuable, not when it's just accumulated and compartmentalized, but when it's deeply understood, authentically valued, and thoughtfully applied in a way that truly serves all learners. And for this humanizing approach, the street data model, to move from being an inspiring ideal to becoming the rule and not the exception, as Sophie Finelli so wisely emphasizes.
Right, the rule, not the exception.
It requires a conscious, collective, and systemic commitment, not just isolated acts of individual courage.
It takes the whole system changing.
Exactly. It's about fundamentally reshaping our policies, rethinking our funding models, critically examining our mindsets at every level: classrooms, state legislatures, beyond. This profound transformation isn't just about incrementally fixing schools. It's about courageously reimagining and actively creating a world that truly works for all of us. By ensuring that every young person has the profound opportunity to learn, develop, and thrive through an education that honors their full humanity and unique potential.
And so as we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave you with a provocative thought, maybe something to chew on. Building on those two core expansive lessons we just explored, if learning doesn't truly require a school building or even a traditional classroom, and if there are indeed countless ways of knowing and succeeding beyond what our current systems typically measure and validate, then what does school really need to be for you? And perhaps even more importantly, how can we, both individually in our own spheres and collectively as communities, champion and nurture those many diverse ways of knowing for all learners in our world?